Ezekiel, among many of the prophets, is longing for a time in which God will restore the brokenness. From your idols I will cleanse you. I will give you a new heart. But why? I will give you a new spirit. But how? I will put my spirit within you. But when? No one else was in the room when the word happened. The room where it happens, the room where it happens. No one else really knows. The game is played, how the game is played, the art of the raid, the time, how the sausage gets set aside. But every once in a while, the room where it happens. No one was in the room when it happened. That's a problem for Christine. We have two traditions, two important traditions. But we don't have a birth narrative like a resurrection narrative. We don't have a narrative of being in the room when it happened. So I want to turn to a different version of the resurrection tonight that the Western Church is not as familiar with as the Eastern Church. They did hold together until around 1200, when the Western Church decided to sack Constantinople, and the Lombards of Italy took political control, and basically went with the vision that we are doing tonight, the vision of the empty tomb. But I'm going to return to last Sunday. We all heard it, but maybe we didn't digest it. In Matthew's Passion narrative, and when Jesus cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from the top to the bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, the tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. No one else was in the room when it happened. The empty tomb tradition is an important tradition, and it has very important Hebrew connotations as to why there is an empty tomb. That's for another time. Tonight we're going to talk about the risen vision tradition, which we will hear a moment in the gospel where Mary Magdalene is having a vision of a risen Christ. Paul has a vision of the risen Christ on the road to Damascus. And Thomas has a risen vision of Jesus in the upper room. There is a long tradition of a risen vision. And I would like to unravel some of that for us tonight so that we can hear it and understand its power and its meaning. Two parables, if you will, of Jesus. Parable of the empty tomb, the parable of a risen vision. Both offer radical paradigm shifts in our understanding of God and the world. Now, when resurrection was talked about in Greek language, the word that was used to describe what was happening was anastasis, which translates into English as an uprising. The resurrection is depicted as an uprising. But by whom? And with whom? And for what? And against what? We have eloquently learned how the crucifixion is a parable against civilization. Civilization which began 3,000 years BC. Civilization has raised a problem, though, of escalating violence. When we moved from being a nomadic people into protecting farms and cities, violence in the human community escalated. So the question that crucifixion and resurrection are perhaps asking us tonight: has civilization really saved us from barbarianism? What will save us, then, from civilization? What does anastasis offer to civilization this night? It offers the conquest of death, differently than perhaps you have understood it or thought about it. It offers the liberation and the deliverance of humanity. And it proposes a collaborative kingdom, not a hierarchical one. Jesus in his teachings said, "I will only offer you one sign. It's the sign of Jonah." The prophets of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Jonah and many others were seeking a universal salvation for all the peoples of the world, all the nations of the world. They were seeking a liberation of humanity. And so when we talk about the risen vision, what gets depicted in iconography is a depiction of Jesus with his cross, standing at the gate of Hades, where the dead lie, offering his hand to Adam and to Eve, and pulling them out and opening them into a new kingdom. Humanity is being rescued tonight. And the reason that is so important is because it's not just about a future. We're not beginning tonight with a new future. Jesus at his death in Matthew's risen vision is not dead. He's gone to Hades. There is work yet to do. And so he has gone to Hades, and in Matthew's vision, the tombs are being opened up. The dead are coming to life. Jesus is at work, leading out of death into life. Now, for most of us, we understand what we mean by somebody being assumed up into heaven. In fact, there's a great window right here that might be an ascension depiction of Jesus ascending or being assumed up to heaven. Augustus Caesar has a story about being assumed up to heaven. And we have great heroes that we assume are assumed up to heaven. Ezekiel may be one. Elijah may be one. Moses went out into the wilderness and maybe got assumed up to heaven. That's not what the word resurrection means. Resurrection means that Jesus went to Hades and began to liberate all of humanity. Now that is critical for the Apostle Paul. And Paul often refers to Jesus didn't just rise himself. If that happened, it's meaningless. What we mean to be saying is Jesus is raising humanity. He has gone to Hades to finish the work that he began. God's decisive action is to fulfill the vision of the Psalms. According to scriptures, which we will spend some time on over the next several weeks. What is it in scriptures that Jesus is doing? It's all there. A Pharisaic Jew like Paul expects nothing less of the Messiah. If Jesus is truly to be the Messiah, then that is what Jesus is up to. All peoples, all of the oppressed, all of the poor, all of those under dominion of civilization are to be raised. This is how the Gospel of Nicodemus says it. Why then do you marvel at the resurrection of Jesus? What is marvelous is not that he arose, but he not arise alone, that he raised many other dead, who appeared to many in Jerusalem. Obviously, Nicodemus knows the vision that Matthew is referring to. So what might resurrection mean for us today? This concept that the Christian community is so wedded to be able to proclaim a way in which God is acting. The abolitionist Theodore Parker in the 1840s, when we were wrestling with a power so demonic as slavery in this country, said this: look at the facts of the world. You see continual and progressive triumphant right. I do not pretend to understand this moral universe, for the arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the course or the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. But from what I see, I can see that it bends towards justice. You may remember a recent prophetic individual who quoted that in his way repeatedly, whom we remembered this week. I recently read a book by someone named Ed Young, who is a biologist and a scientist, and it was called An Immense World: How Animal Senses Reveal the Hidden Realms Around Us. At the end of the book, after going through all different kinds of species and the way we sense the world and the way we live in the environment of the world, he challenged our species, Homo sapiens, to develop what is, he considers, our greatest sensory skill. That is our curiosity and our imagination. Mary's curious. And she has an incredible imagination. The disciples may not believe her at first. But Mary has the curiosity and the imagination that Ed Young invites us to step into another world. We have been given a choice to make, and it is a gift to us. We have been given a blessing that we must cherish. In the 3rd century, St. Ambrose of Milan said it this way: if Christ did not rise for us, then he did not rise at all, since he had no need to rise for himself. In him, the world arose. In him, heaven arose. In him the earth arose. For there will be a new heaven and a new earth. My final example for tonight around this image of resurrection is clearly articulated by James Cone in his work on Black liberation theology. And that has become clearly understood theologically in the Black Lives Movement. Resurrection says to us the possibility of life after death for any individual is inextricably linked to the struggle against death. Death-dealing forces such as white supremacy. Resurrection confronts all of humanity's false idols.